coming up in Chapter 1 of Shadowed Longings. Before I tried, one last time, to stop wanting men, there was John, the man I couldn't quite leave behind. This was my last serious attempt not to be gay. Desire was no longer abstract by then. It had faces, voices, bodies, and it had, among other things, the shape of John. "I don't know what it is," he said. "I just felt safe with you." Then he stepped toward me, and I toward him, and we embraced. Previously on Shadowed Longings, I met John in his brother's living room. I had come to visit his older brother Josh. Josh flew out of town for work after takeout. We sat on the living room floor across from each other. We continued our conversation, ever deepening. "I don't think I've ever talked this much," he said quietly, "or shared what I have with you with another guy." Without thinking, I moved closer to him. He leaned into me. I took his hand, leading him down the hall, letting our bodies meet without explanation or apology, letting desire have its way with us.
Welcome back to the Good Life Lab, where queer stories meet the science and psychology of a good life. Hi, I'm Dr. Dave, and you're listening to a specially enhanced episode of Shadowed Longings. This series is a look into my creative nonfiction memoir, a real-life slow burn love story. If you're finding value in these stories or the psychological shifts we're exploring, please hit the subscribe button and join the community. Your support helps me bring more of these chapters to life. Now let's dive into today's episode.
Before I tried, one last time, to stop wanting men, there was John, the man I couldn't quite leave behind. Even now, I can hear John's quiet, honest voice. I've always wanted it. But honestly, I have never really felt physically or emotionally close to another man the way I have with you. Years after meeting John, this late-night confession still rang true and unshakable. I felt drawn to him still 13 years later. There was so much unfinished, so many desires in conflict that needed resolution. And so, at 39, I built a 12-month spiritual experiment around silence, sacrifice, and the hope that God might finally quiet my desires for men the way that memory had not. I was living in New Jersey on the campus where I worked, carrying a respectable title, a disciplined exterior, and more unfinished longing than I knew what to do with. My life looked orderly enough from the outside: religious work, adult responsibilities, a carefully managed sense of purpose. But beneath that surface, in the midst of my year-long monk-like covenant, memories of the men I loved had begun to stir. John was one of them. So was his brother Josh. They came back to me in the quiet, not only as memories but as moods, and somehow maybe even as possibilities, as unfinished scenes calling to be completed, as the kind of almost that linger in the body long after the mind has tried to put them away. What I had once told myself was over no longer felt entirely over. Not in silence, not with a journal open, my life stripped of its usual distractions. The quiet had its own intentions. Instead of burying desire, it returned it to me, bringing back the men, the roads not taken, the versions of myself I left behind with them. And with all of that came an unsettling thought that some part of my life might not be finished after all. So I made a covenant for 1 year to find greater resolution, deeper peace, once and for all. I would not cut my hair. I would not watch television. I would strip my life down to prayer, journaling, silence, and whatever voice remained when distraction was taken away. In some ways, it sounded noble. In others, mildly unhinged. But desperation has always had a way of dressing itself up in spiritual language. I told myself I wanted clarity. That much was true. I wanted direction, peace, a cleaner signal above the noise. I wanted to know what to do with the life I had built, and the life that kept pressing against it from underneath. At its starkest, this was my last serious attempt not to be gay. But even that is too simple. By then, my 39th year of covenant had become something more intimate and more dangerous, a season of listening closely to desires that had outlived every effort to silence them, and of asking whether the life I had spent decades trying to build could still hold. The setting suited the drama. The campus where I lived and worked was an old religious community. Stone buildings, quiet lawns, ceremonial rhythms enough sacred architecture to make even a private crisis feel liturgical. It was the kind of place where vows seemed plausible, the kind of place where a man could mistake restraint for peace and silence for certainty. By then, I had spent decades trying to discipline, outpray, outlast, or otherwise spiritualize my desire for men into submission. Therapy, prayer, fasting, Bible reading, ex-gay conferences, accountability, celibacy, books with earnest titles and impossible promises. I had given my heart to every sanctioned strategy I knew and still found myself drawn toward other men, not only physically, but emotionally, romantically, imaginatively, in every way that mattered. Desire was no longer abstract by then. It had faces, voices, bodies, and it had, among other things, the shape of John. Colorado had happened 13 years earlier. I can still feel that morning after in my body. I was on the couch. John was below me on the floor in a sleeping bag. We had talked long into the night, the way people do when something is happening that neither of them has a good name for yet. It had been only 48 hours, and somehow that made it worse. Too short to call history. Too charged to dismiss as coincidence. He and his brother Josh had welcomed me into their world in Colorado during a break from seminary, and somewhere in that brief span of time, something in me had changed. Or perhaps not changed. Revealed. I remember lying there above John, not sleeping so much as ruminating through the night with dread sitting squarely on my chest. Morning was coming, and with it, my return to Kentucky, to seminary, to the life I had chosen, and the man I was trying very hard to be. The room held that strange intimacy of temporary arrangements, the borrowed blanket, the dimness, the nearness of another body, the silence after a long conversation that felt more revealing than many confessions I'd made to God. There is a particular ache that belongs to the morning after a deep connection you can't satisfy. It is not heartbreak exactly. Not yet. It is more fragile and more dangerous than that. The sense that something beautiful has opened before you and is already closing. Morning had arrived too soon, the way it always does when your heart has finally found something it wants to linger near. John drove me across town to my friend Anthony's house, where my ride back to Kentucky was waiting. The air in Colorado held that crisp, high country brightness that made everything look more alive than I wanted it to. I would have preferred fog, rain, a divine weather pattern, more in keeping with my emotional state. But no, the sun was out, clean and merciless, laying its hand across the windshield as if this were any ordinary morning. John looked over at me and smiled, but it was the kind of smile that already knew it was saying goodbye. "How'd you sleep?" he asked. Not good, really," I said. He let out a soft laugh. "Yeah, me too." And there it was, immediately, that strange tenderness that can live inside the most ordinary exchange. Two men saying almost nothing and somehow confessing everything. For a while we just drove, the silence between us not empty exactly, but full of things we had already said the night before, and things neither of us quite knew how to say now in daylight. The car felt smaller than it should have, or maybe it was just that my awareness of him had become so outsized. The shape of his hands on the steering wheel, the line of his jaw, the softness that came over his face when he was thinking. I kept looking out the window, then back at him, then out the window again, like a man trying not to stare at what he was already memorizing. "I wish you weren't leaving today," he said finally. I heard a faint sadness and anticipatory grief in his voice as it quivered. I looked down and smiled, the way people do when they are trying to contain too much feeling inside a socially acceptable facial expression. "Yeah," I said. "Me too." He glanced at me, then back at the road. "It's strange," he said. "I feel like I've known you longer than this." He lifted one hand briefly from the wheel, gesturing vaguely in front of us, as if the previous 48 hours were some insufficient measurement system. I nodded. "I know. I don't usually." He trailed off, searching. "I don't usually talk the way I talked with you." "You mean about real things?" I said. That made him smile again. Yeah, he said. About real things. There was a pause. The kind that is less a break in conversation than a deepening of it. I don't know what it is, he said. I just felt safe with you. I turned toward him then. Safe. It was not a flashy word, not romantic in the cinematic sense. No violins, no sweeping declaration. But it landed in me with more force than some grander sentence might have. Safe was intimate. Safe was rare. Safe meant he had felt something too. Me too, John. I feel very comfortable talking with you, I said. He swallowed and nodded once, eyes forward, jaw tightening just slightly. The air in the car shifted. I could feel us both registering the weight of what had just been admitted. It's weird, he said after a moment, smiling sadly now. You can spend years around people and never say anything that matters, and then someone shows up for 2 days and suddenly you're telling him things you haven't said out loud to anyone. Maybe that's because sometimes a stranger sees you more clearly than the people who already think they know you. He looked at me then, really looked. Not long enough to be reckless, but long enough to make the space between us feel charged. Maybe, he said. The city moved around us in ordinary shapes, stoplights, intersections, modest houses, parked cars. But inside the car something quieter and far less manageable was taking place. I was aware, painfully aware, of how drawn I was to him. Not only to his kindness or his mind, though those were there in abundance. Not only to the ease and gravity of our conversation. I was aware of him physically too, in that involuntary way attraction makes itself known before morality or theology can organize a response. His strength, his shoulders and arms, his profile, the warmth of him, the simple fact of being near him. And yet, what made it unbearable was not lust alone. It was affection, recognition, the sense that I was sitting beside someone I wanted, yes, but also someone I could rest with, someone I wanted to know in the long, ordinary way of life, someone I wanted to keep talking to after the deepest things had already been said. John broke the silence first. Can I tell you something without it? I don't know. Being weird? I laughed softly. That depends entirely on what it is. He smiled, but his eyes stayed serious. I don't think I've ever felt this close to another man before. I did not answer right away, not because I had nothing to say, but because too many things rose at once. Neither had I. Not like this, where it felt like an almost immediate mutual attraction. Not where closeness felt both emotional and physical, human and holy, comforting and destabilizing. Not where I wanted to lean in and stay there. Not where the conversation itself felt like touch. I know what you mean, I said quietly. I don't think I have either. He exhaled slowly, almost like relief. I keep thinking I should say this better, he said. Or maybe not say it at all. But I don't want to pretend this was nothing. The words hung there between us, bright and trembling. This wasn't nothing, I said. That was the closest either of us came to naming it directly. And maybe it was enough. Maybe in that moment, it had to be enough. Two men with complicated loyalties and fragile courage, speaking in partial truths because full truths might have broken the frame entirely. He laughed once, softly, and shook his head. You're making it very hard to... Well, that line hit me like both a compliment and a warning. Trust me, I said, I'm having the same problem. We both laughed then, but it was the laugh of men standing too close to the edge of something and trying, for one last second, to maintain control. Then his voice changed. Thank you, he said. I turned to him. For what? He kept his eyes on the road for a second before answering. For giving me what you did. His voice caught just slightly. For the space to just talk about everything I've kept inside for way too long. All of my life, really. I still can't believe I told you what I did. I should be more embarrassed by it all, but I'm not. I love my family, my brother, Josh. But there are just some things I can't talk to them about. I really do think I feel closer to you, Dave, than I've felt with any other man before. That was the confession. The one that entered me and stayed. He did not say desire. He did not say attraction. He did not say loneliness, though all of those were present like hidden notes in a chord. He said closer. and there was so much inside that word, I almost could not bear it. I looked down, because I could already feel my eyes beginning to sting. "You gave me that too," I said. "More than you know," he nodded. And for a moment, neither of us trusted ourselves to say anything else. By the time we pulled up outside Anthony's house, I already felt the beginning of grief in my throat. Anthony's car was there in the driveway, waiting with the terrible steadiness of planned things. Kentucky was sitting there in plain sight, in the luggage, in the timing, in the next obligation already dressed and ready. Seminary, calling, duty, the life I was supposed to return to. John put the car in park, but neither of us reached for the door. "Well," he said softly. It was such a small word for such a large moment. "Yeah," I said. Neither of us moved. I remember the silence then as vividly as anything we said. Not awkward, not uncertain, just full of resistance, full of knowing, full of that terrible human instinct to slow down time by refusing to cooperate with it. I turned toward him. "I don't really know what to do with this," I said. He looked at me, eyes already bright. "I know. I don't want to just," I started, then stopped. "Leave," he said. I nodded. His face tightened. "I know. There are moments in life when two people understand each other so fully that language almost becomes secondary. This was one of them." The sadness on his face mirrored the ache in me so precisely that it felt less like I was looking at him and more like I was seeing my own heart reflected back. I reached for the door because I had to, or I never would have. Outside, the morning felt too open, too exposed. Anthony's house sat there innocently, as though it had no idea it was serving as the site of one of the more emotionally inconvenient goodbyes of my life. John got out too. For a second, we just stood there, close enough to feel the pull of one another, both of us suspended between restraint and need. Then, he stepped toward me, and I toward him, and we embraced. Not the quick, macho, one-armed kind meant to deny itself. A real embrace. Full. Immediate. Both of us holding on longer than politeness allows. The kind of hug that becomes, within seconds, something more revealing than either person intended. I could feel him breathing, feel the tension in him, feel the reluctance in both our bodies, as though neither of us wanted to register this as ending. My arms tightened around him, and I felt his do the same. And then the tears came, not dramatic sobbing, just that quiet undoing when the body admits what the mouth has been trying not to say. I could feel his chest shaking with sadness. Still holding on, I said, "John," and then nothing else came. "I know," he whispered in my ear. We held on tighter, longer. There was something almost unbearable in the tenderness of it, in how little permission either of us had ever had for this kind of closeness, and how natural it felt, anyway. It felt like grief, yes, but also like recognition. Like the body saying, "Here, this is what you have been missing." I remember wanting, with a sudden, almost violent force, to not let go, to stay there in that driveway and let the entire rest of my life deal with itself. Seminary could wait. Theology could wait. God could wait. Let me have one more minute. One more honest minute inside the arms of a man I did not want to leave. When we finally drew back, it was only barely. He looked wrecked. Beautiful and wrecked. "So this is it?" John said, trying for a smile and failing. "I don't want it to be," I said. "Me neither." Neither of us said goodbye as if we meant forever. Something in both of us was still reaching past the moment, toward letters, toward another conversation, toward some way of not letting this tenderness end in a driveway. The hope of staying in each other's lives hovered there, quiet, but unmistakable. There should have been some final perfect line, something quotable, something worthy of literature and later reflection. But real partings rarely cooperate with our aesthetic hopes. Mostly, there was just breath and tears, and two men searching each other's faces as if memorization itself were a form of staying. Then, quietly, he said it again. "Thank you, Dave, for giving me what you did, for the space to talk and feel close to another man." I think I nodded before I could speak. "Thank you," I said finally, "for trusting me with that." for all of this. All of this. Another vague phrase carrying an unreasonable amount of meaning. Then we let go, because time is cruel, and driveway reunions require a certain level of mutual cooperation with reality. We double-checked phone numbers and reiterate a strong desire to stay in touch. I knew I couldn't just let him go completely, all broken and splayed open like he was, like I was. I believed wholeheartedly that geography wouldn't keep us apart. But I knew there was a greater distance that we'd need to overcome, that of religious conviction, of desires in conflict. Our feelings for one another were at the very least a fleeting but genuine bromance. More likely the way I felt for John, and I was convinced he felt for me. Our feelings were signs of a true romance that was forbidden by our faith traditions. I picked up my bag and walked toward Anthony's house. I turned back once. Of course I did. John was still standing there beside the car, looking at me with the expression people wear when something important has happened and no one has yet agreed on the language for it. I lifted a hand. He did too. And then I went inside, carrying with me the unmistakable feeling that I just left something I was never meant to treat lightly. I got into Anthony's car with the strange, hollow feeling of someone who had tried to do the right thing, but already felt in his bones to be the wrong one.
Next time on Shadowed Longings.
But inside, I was unraveling. You were already being a fool. Not because I had feelings for John, because I was driving away from them as though that were the holiest response available. I swallowed. I think I need to go back. I was feeling called toward another man. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes. I don't know what to do, I said.
Airing most Fridays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Shadowed Longings is a production of the Good Life Lab with Dr. Dave, where queer stories meet the science and psychology of a good life.